evening, good afternoon, and good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to Raising Excellence, one of the most valuable hours of your day. Today's show, Fearing Death, a Mistake. Today is Wednesday, and so Wednesday, this is, we're actually, shoot, what am I thinking? Let's talk to our other hosts. Let's start with Agnieszka, our psychosomatic illuminator.
Hello, everybody. Nice to be here. I can't wait to talk about death.
And Willow, our trauma consultant. Are you excited about death?
Yeah, actually. I've been preparing for this conversation since I was a high school goth so I'm excited. I'm glad that, high school skills finally carried over into adulthood.
Lovely. And Deirdre, our development strategist.
Hey everybody, I'm so glad you're here.
Glad to have you.
I don't get a question. Oh.
Let's see. Well, it's got to do something with death.
Okay.
Are you excited about death?
Yeah, it's transformational.
Indeed.
I hope so. And finally, Dennis, our freedom facilitator.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here. Glad to be alive.
Very much so. Awesome. Okay, so if you're viewing us live and you have a question or a comment, feel free to let us know. We'll try and answer it as you throw it out there. And again, remember,
Mike, my husband had a response to your question as well, and he said to let everyone know that he is screaming in Pashtuni, and that was his response to how does he feel about death. So okay, some people will get that joke, but
well, I was just going to mention that we bumped Dennis, so Dennis's week is coming up next week, and he's going to be covering finding freedom. So next week, I wanted to make sure we did that. Now, I want to explain this concept that we're doing here. We're doing a 2-show concept. And so today's show is on fear of death and why it's a mistake. And then 2 weeks from now, not next Wednesday, but the Wednesday after that, we're going to cover this topic again, but we're going to cover it from a different angle, which is based on what we do today. So with that said, let's talk about a fear of death as a mistake. So that really, I've got 2 videos that I would recommend people watch in regard to this topic. One is a TED Talk, and I don't know, does anybody remember the name of that one? I posted it in the notes here. Let's see.
I can check it. Hang on.
It's The Dangers of Fearing Death. And then the other one is called The Fear of Death and the Ego. And 2 really excellent resources. But in it, they really start off with, shoot, I lost my spot here. People's actions due to irrational fears. And essentially having an irrational fear of death and making mistakes and doing things that are wrong. And so in one of the videos, the gentleman talks about someone that's diagnosed with a terminal disease. And instead of, taking that time to make the most of it, they sink into, like a self-reflecting nightmare that eventually ends in their death, but also isolated themselves from having a much better opportunity to live the last of their life, and so he points that out. But let me ask you guys, did you watch the videos, or do you have any feelings in regard to irrational fear causing people to make bad decisions?
But what makes you think it's irrational? That's a
Well, that's
loaded
the
word there, irrational. So let's
yeah.
dig into that one first before we get into the
Okay.
second part.
All right.
It
So is
only
that a
seems
question?
irrational. I was going to answer it. I was going to say it only
Okay. Go
seems
ahead.
irrational if you don't know what lesson was learned to begin with, because most people aren't going to make an irrational decision. They have a reason for doing it, even if they don't want to acknowledge it.
Well, also, we all are going to face our own death. And so it's
Mm.
inevitable. And so fearing that and then not, and then essentially failing to prepare for that and failing to understand what that means that we aren't really living our life fully, and so like that's one of the things that when I say, most people are living at like 5 or 10% of their potential. If they really haven't contemplated their own death, they probably don't, and really kind of reevaluate their values on a regular basis because of it.
See,
They
I don't agree with you there, Mike. I think
Okay.
people do think about that is what is going to happen. That, yeah, one day they're going to die. I think it starts at a very young age. I know I started at a young age when I consciously came aware that, gee, one day my mum is going to die. And that whole concept, I was a child when that kind of that realization, and even my own children realize that. Like,
Well, we're talking about your own death, though.
yeah,
Like
yeah, I
understanding the value of your life on a daily basis,
yeah.
and how that, like, being prepared for death probably also means the opportunity to understand how valuable your time is.
It's
You know,
and see, I think that people do think of it regularly, and I think that it's too much for them because they get so weighed down with where they are because they're not living in line with their values, and so they get to that point
Well, I
where it's
mean,
at risk. That
but
where
if you're
it's at
looking at the
risk. So
masses, if you're looking at the masses and what they're complaining about, and what they're doing with their lives, you can certainly see that they're not reaching for their potential. They're falling victim to their fears, and certainly one of the most powerful ones is the fear of death, and that's why it's, we're going through the situation we're going through, is because people are acting irrationally because of the fear of death, and
mm.
so they're taking advantage of that.
I think
No,
it
Isn't
might
that
be good to
obvious?
analyze. I think it might be good to analyze like our own thoughts and feelings surrounding death, because
Sure.
I get what Deirdre's saying. I've had this conversation with a really, really good close friend of mine, and she told me of how the day that she still remembers the day she realized that she was going to die one day. And she was very young, and it scared the crap out of her. She said that it messed her up for weeks. She couldn't stop thinking about it. Like, it was just obsessive, and it really she just remembered it. And at that moment, I actually realized that I don't remember learning what death was. It's almost as if I've always known that I was born and that I was going to die one day. I was also raised on a farm, so I did witness death, but I don't have a recollection of having a problem with it. And I've also noticed if they're like a lot of my friends have had the same experiences, and a lot of people who have been in traumatic situations, they have can sometimes have differing views. Some of them go to the I'm going to fear death, I'm going to fear everything and never make a move, or the I'm going to fully embrace it, expect it, and I'm going to be reckless. So it would be good, I think, to see what are our actual views about it, so that we can just get a more well-rounded perspective.
Sure. Dennis, do you have anything to say or add?
Sure. Well, fear of death can only be, I would say, if, well, it leads you back to, if you say, I am afraid of death, or I have fear of death, then it's like, who are you? If you speak from the perspective of your physical being and of your body, and and it's obvious that the body is not going to last forever, so the body is going to die. And if you associate fully, and if you live in the body, so to say, or out of the perspective of the body, then that body not being again, if you fully identified with that, would mean that you cease to exist, that who you is won't be again. And that's certainly devastating. And that's like, wow, you know, you're not being again. However, if you speak, if you say, if the I am is beyond the body, and is something, you know, that something beyond your physicality, and you, and then by the sheer by sheer laws of physics, you know, when it said that energy never ceases to exist, it merely changes, it can change its state, but it won't cease to be, then it is only logic that even if the body won't exist again, but if you're more than that, then what happens to that more? Is that something that won't be again, or if that's just something that will transition, that will change its state? Just like the body also will change its state, you know, it won't be the physical body as it is again. It will, you know, decompose, it will become soil, it will, you know, everything that has lived. That's something in permaculture I heard many times. Everything that has lived before can live again and will live again, just in a different form, in a different way. So the fear, where does the fear come? The fear can only come from you not identifying with who you truly are. Because if you would live in that and talk from that perspective, then, you know, you would only know that you will change your state as you did when you came into this into this life, into this world. And one thing that was interesting for me is that oftentimes people think of life and death as two contrary things, but really and truly life is all there is, and the contrary to death is birth. It's not life, but life is all there is, and part of life is birth and death, but the contrary to death is to being born, and which are both parts of life. And for me, from my perspective, those situations in my life when I came closest to death, or when I, you know, how would you say, like when I not experience it like that, but I experience it like in other people, or, you know, around me or close by me, those were the moments that really made me appreciate life the most.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Love that response. I don't know. Deirdre, do you have any objection to what Dennis said?
No, what he said was lovely. It was beautiful. It was really poetic. Um, See, I with my therapy, it's more in line with death is something that is unchangeable. It's inevitable, and so it needs to be an accepted part of life. And I can either ignore it and then get to 50 and go, holy crap, I've just lived, you know, I've got like only 40 years to live. Well, I'm just going to throw everything in. I'm going to buy a red Lamborghini. I'm going to get like a 20-year-old man or woman. I'm going to divorce my husband, ignore my children, spend their inheritance. So I've only got 40 years left. And, you know, I've been running the life that I was told that I needed to run. Now I need to run it for me. That's kind of that is what usually does happen. And for
Well,
me,
but I'm not saying that's correct. I'm not saying that's a result of contemplating one's death because, or, you know, like seeking one's own value. But I think that's kind of a superficial uh, uh, stereotype of what
which part?
you know, like the being selfish is, you know, buying a new car and, you know, throwing away your old refuse and, you know, just blowing the money and living for yourself.
Well,
You know,
the
what we're
reason it's
talking about is actually
stereotypical.
contemplating, you know, what are the most valuable things in your life and making the most impact on those.
I would say acceptance that it is there and it is real, and taking responsibility for that. Going, gee, if I want to die honorably, if I want to die, um, you know, as a you know, I can either die isolated and hating the world and going, gee, why is it my time now? Like, let's say if I have cancer or some terminal illness, and just get
Yeah.
angry and just push everybody away and go, I can't believe, why
Right.
me? Why me? Or I could go, okay, this is reality. It was going to happen at some point. Right now, this is happening for me. It's a bit sooner than later. That, okay, all
Yeah.
right, what do I want to do about it? I make sure that I do that consciously because I'm taking responsibility that that is a condition of life.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say that's what I'm talking about as far as that being a very important activity to engage in that I don't think most people do.
Yep.
Hmm. So how would they get there? I would say taking responsibility for your life. I would say that, you know, even in the last breaths, I know that I still have those last breaths where I can still be in dignity with myself. I can still,
Yeah.
you know, even if I try and hold myself up, be calm for my family. I'm still, even in my last breaths, taking my responsibility.
Well, like watching that first video, the guy expresses the difference between the person that fears death and basically closes up and gets angry and hates the world because he's dying, or the person that loves life and loves every minute of life and makes sure that he tells that to everybody else. And he, being that he had been in a life or death situation himself, he sees this and he sees the difference, between the two, and identifies that, when you're when you're loving life, you're absent fear. And that's the big difference, and that's what, makes it a golden moment, and certainly what raises people's potential or energy
Mm.
level to reach their potential too.
But I think that when people are afraid of death, it's not about whatever their appreciation of life. It's maybe fear of punishment or negative consequences, like, what if I go to hell, or what if I don't, I don't know. Like, people have other fears that they're experiencing. And it's funny
Yeah.
because as an adult I haven't really been afraid of death at all, but I remember being a child and it messed me up, like Deirdre said, for weeks. When, or Sam, whoever.
That was Sam. That was Willow.
Willow.
The
But what? No. So there was a news item. There was a news item that a kid died in his room because the gas pipe broke, and it was next to his room. And his parents survived because they were on the other side of the house, but he died, and his door was closed. And then for the longest time, I didn't want my door closed ever to my room because I was afraid that if something happens, my parents wouldn't even know that I died. You know what I mean? Like, they couldn't protect me. It was like a thing. I mean, they
yeah.
couldn't even protect him. They were in the same house and he died anyway. Like, normally you'd think you'd die somewhere away from your parents, so, as a 10-year-old or whatever. But
Yeah.
You mentioned, was it last week, Michael, that there is a specific culture like around death in Mexico where you are, and I was remembered. I don't know much about that. That should be interesting also to hear a little more about. However, I know a little bit about Indian and a culture that is based in yogic tradition, where also death is something that a lot of people will prepare for their entire life, and the
Yeah.
moment of death, which we talked about, I think David just touched upon that, is something very very special. Obviously, even like going back in yogi tradition, and someone's life might be an entire preparation only for that moment. And
Yeah.
yeah, so that's something really interesting, like how important that moment can actually be, in the state that you are in when that moment comes, and to see your entire life as a preparation for that moment of transitioning into the next or different realms.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioning the Mexican kind of value in regard to respecting death and visiting every year with it, and the death of their ancestors, and showing the dead respect. I think really kind of emphasizes the idea of like what are the memories we're going to leave, to our prodigy, and how is that going to impact them, and when you think about them remembering you and what you meant to them or what you instilled in them or inspired in them, you know that's something they consider, and they consider it once a year. They recognize it just like Christmas. In fact, I think it's the greatest holiday uh, ever, really, honestly.
Hmm.
But that means that,
So
I think that's one of the other things that makes this a valuable place, and why people, I think, are much nicer to each other, is because they have a really good understanding of what life means to them.
In contrary to that, from my perception, like especially here in the West, it is something, that is really pushed away and tried to be, kind of kept like under a carpet. And even like seeing how people treat with death here, or if there's a death in the family, and funerals, and how that's being taken on, Germany, for example, compared to Jamaica, which are two cultures that I would have experienced to a certain extent. um it's very, here especially in Germany, it's very hush hush, and you can't look at the dead body. You're not supposed to see it. It's all closed up. And so when you look at India, or even like in Jamaica, like where the body is like being prepared, and people pass by and like drive to town and have like extended ceremonies with it. And that's already like a whole different concept. And people are confronted with that, and I have the feeling that here, for the most part, it's something like, oh, like, don't look at it, oh no, away, and hush hush, and just um
Yeah.
it's something, it's like, once the person died, and 2 minutes after, it's already gone away. And if you look at funeral ceremonies like in Indian and Hindu culture, for example, where the body is burned, where like everybody's exposed to it, the community actually is even exposed to it as well. It's a whole different level of exposing yourself to the fact that the body is is a physical material thing, and it's just like everything else that's physical. It has its lifetime, and once it wears out, that's how it looks, that's how it's done. And so it's something people are exposed to on a different level than here, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah. Which kind of leads to the second area that I wanted to discuss, which is the benefits of overcoming a fear of death, and what that might be. And then finally, I want to talk about an exercise I want people to engage in, and we can do that as well ourselves. But in preparation for the second show, I want to kind of give people this exercise to do, and then reflect on in preparation for the second show, which is where we're going to really kind of show how valuable this is, and how it can really change people's lives by kind of confronting a fear of death, or even a perceived fear of death.
Mm. I would say like the fear of death, there's an aspect of self preservation in us, like an instinctive part of us, which is if a truck or something comes towards us, that we jump to the side, and that we have this this instinct of self preservation. That's one of the laws of life, really, that everything that is alive wants to live. So
Yeah.
that is important, and that definitely has its place. But once it goes beyond that, then it becomes like a mind thing that that keeps us down, and that keeps us from realizing our potential. And that's certainly something detrimental. So how have you dealt with that? Would you say you have overcome your fear of death?
Me personally, I've always kind of been someone that I guess I feel like I got a guardian angel on my shoulder, and it's worked. So many times I've confronted my own death, and like had situations in which like my life passed before my eyes. And because of that's one of the reasons why I value my time so much. And I like take every day to make a decision about, what's the best thing for me to do today, you know, because life is really, and even though I was a young man and I was very lucky, I still thought, man, I'm going to live to be 100.
Mm.
And now that I'm, in my 50s, even that's getting pretty close.
I've always planned for 150. I figure if I don't live till 150, it's no big deal. But if I do live till 150, at least I won't be without a plan. Because, you'd stagnate if you don't have a plan. So you got to plan ahead. So I'm planning for another,
Yeah, well, the thing though is when you confront your own death and realize that it could come at any time, your time could be up. You could walk out in the street and the bus could hit you and it'd be all over.
Yeah, but see,
Or
the thing
you could
is,
live forever.
if you die at any time, that doesn't negatively impact your plans. But if you don't die and you have no plan, that will definitely negatively impact your life. Because not the plan. I can see Dennis. I can see him thinking, well, you need a plan. You don't need a plan. It's not about a plan like schedule plan. It's about a goal, a dream, a desire, a movement, a growth, something I can look towards and strive towards at every time. Like this whole culture of excellence thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's essentially something that really kind of kicks people into gear, I think, or gives them the opportunity. And that's what this exercise should be kind of viewed towards, is this is an opportunity to really kick yourself into gear because this exercise does do a great deal of positive for a lot of people. Stephen Covey is the guy that puts it in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And, so it's been practiced by millions of people. And the reports are, like 99% in favor of taking the time to do it, And so it's an important thing. But let's talk a little bit more about the benefits of overcoming fear then. Does anybody want to contribute on just overcoming fear?
Well, so there are basically two things. There's like love and all its friends and fear and all its friends. So you're either on this side or that side, and they don't really mix. So fear and anger and resentment and disgruntlement and all of that stuff is on one side. And then love, affection, care, blah, blah, blah. It's on this side.
For me, it was when I realized that fear is just an emotion. That kind of did it for me. It's just, oh, well, I have plenty of emotions and I know what they are. No, I cope with them and I deal with them and I kind of evaluate them. And so when I came to that realization, it made that thing, thought, actual fear of something coming towards me, it lessened, because it's just my body having a reaction to my emotion. So it doesn't mean I don't have self-preservation or anything. It's more I don't let it hijack me, so I can make more efficient decisions.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's beautiful.
I have no idea how to tie this into the conversation, but it has not left my mind the entire time.
All right, well, let's have it.
I didn't necessarily have a fear of death. I don't really, not that I recall, but I do remember my mother was a cosmetologist, and she was hired to do the makeup for a deceased a friend of the family. And I asked to go with her because I was like, sure, I want to see a dead body. That's kind of cool. I want to know what it looks like. I've never been in a funeral home. I was just a really weird, curious kid. And I remember looking at her before she had makeup on, and I was really confused. I was like, why are you putting makeup on her? And then my mom explained that, the way she looked now was for the benefit of the family. I'm not sure. There was something reassuring about how that was still that person's body. Like it wasn't them. Everyone acknowledged that person was no longer here. But it was still the respect that it was shown, the body was shown after the soul had passed, and these are my own words, my own interpretation of it, was really reassuring. It was an answer to a question of what happens after death, because death doesn't necessarily bother me. Not knowing what's going to happen afterwards, it kind of bugs me because I was raised in a religious, environment. So I was told I got in trouble a lot. So I was like, I'm definitely going to hell, um, but I don't know. That was reassuring. And I didn't really actually grow up with much culture about um, how to respect the dead in general. Like I'd been to funerals and it was just a different, more personal experience. I don't know. I don't know how to tie that in, but I just remember that it was reassuring and it answered a question that I didn't even really hadn't known that I had.
Yeah, well, just to kind of tack onto that, I spent some time in South Africa and in the Zulu Natal, the state of the Zulu state. Um, the Zulus, they practice like an honoring of the dead, like their birthday. So when people die, it becomes a date on the calendar, for all their ancestors, uh, to celebrate. And I had the occasion, one of the people I was hanging around with, their brother had one of these things, and they made it into like a weekend, where they were celebrating and getting together with all the family. I mean, extended family and everything, to recognize the spirit of the deceased person. So again, this is what I'm talking about in regard to like what we perceive to be a fear of death. There's other people out there just embracing death, you know, and how is that different from what we're doing? And should it be something we should consider? That's essentially the
That's
kind of the question I'm asking.
I really appreciated that you mentioned the different cultures, because our culture, I find that it's very death is meant to be a fearful thing. They even show in cartoons death running around like hunting people down, and that's something that you're supposed to run and hide, and it's
Right.
that's quite fearful. Well, I think showing children that, whereas like that culture, that the children be seeing, oh no, it's something to be rejoiced. You will be remembered. You get to
Yes.
even after death, you will still be elevated. You will still,
Right.
you know, be remembered. That's lovely. That's beautiful. That
That's a that's a way also
Have
of
you
confronting yourself with that fear, right? Which is a way of overcoming fear. So by confronting yourself with the death, with your ancestors, with the fact that they have died, and at the same time celebrating that and making a ceremony, a ritual out of that, it's a way of encountering, of not like putting it under the carpet and trying to say it's not there and trying to forget it, but it's you confront yourself with it, and therefore you familiarize with it, and that is a way, I feel, of overcoming fear. And if we overcome fear, and fear of death especially, which is like one of the, I think, biggest things that holds us back and that limits us, and which is also being used against us by other people, by systems who use that kind of basic fear that is instilled in us from early on to control and manipulate us. So the potential of overcoming that fear for me means also to free myself in from being susceptible to manipulation from outside, from people and systems that might use that fear in order to make me behave a way that is beneficial to them.
Somebody said to me the other day, said that you always have a choice, no matter what the situation is, you always have a choice. You can always choose death.
yes.
And I was like, that's pretty intense, but at the same time it's true, because no one can make me do anything I don't want to do. I can always choose otherwise, always.
Right.
Yes.
Well, and that also gives you an idea of the spectrum of infinity on the other side, which is the other side of your potential. Understanding that you could end it today also means that it could go on forever. And, what does that mean in regard to potential? It's a lot. So that's another perspective to keep in mind is, like seeing the whole spectrum also raise, like on the negative side also means that there's that positive side that we can see now because we've increased, our understanding and our awareness.
You know why I have the 150-year plan? Because when I got to about 30, I was like, oh, I wonder how many years I have left. Oh, I don't know if I should make any plans. And then I was like, no, 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 no. You're going to make plans for 150 years to make sure you have enough plans to last you. Because I saw at the time,
Well, yeah, you
all
could
these
get more efficient,
Well, I saw all these adults, right? And they had no dreams and they had no aspirations. They barely had any hobbies. And they were just living till retirement. And after retirement, it's like death. Like there's nothing after retirement. Whereas adults who had interests, who kept themselves vibrant and interested in and exploring, like mentally, physically, emotionally, whatever, exploring things spiritually, they didn't seem to be so pointless. Like, so how do you say that? Because it's not that the people were pointless, but their lives seem to be like have no dreams. You go to work to make the money, to get the bread, to gain the strength, to go to work to get the money.
There was this study. I remember hearing about it a few years ago, and they wanted to know why not everybody in an emergency situation tries to fight for their life. Just in line with what Agnieszka was saying about dreams and goals. And so they, it was on the ships that would be sinking or whatever, okay? They got all the surveillance footage and mapped out people who were who were trying to survive, and there were green dots, and then there were red dots, and then there were yellow dots. And they're like, so as you can see, the red dots are people who already died. And so, the host asks, they're like, oh, so what are the yellow dots? And the scientist says, oh, well, the yellow dots are actually people that aren't dead yet. And he's like, so what are they doing? He goes, well, I'll zoom into somebody and see what they're doing. And he zoomed into somebody and goes, so see this guy here? He's not dead, and he's just lying down. And the host goes, why? And the scientist said, well, unfortunately, he's just lying down waiting to die. He could be just, done with life. He's just been waiting for this moment, and now he's got an opportunity. The ship's sinking, everything's on fire. He's probably waiting for the fire to come around. He goes, but there's a lot of yellow dots. The host said, a lot of yellow dots. There's actually quite not that many people trying to get, free and from their life for their life. And that was it, because they had no goals, they had no dreams, they were just living life, and they were just looking for a reason just to end that where they didn't, maybe religious reasons, where they didn't have to kill themselves, but they were dying inside. That is,
or they were already dead.
That they weren't dead. They weren't
no, but on some level,
inside,
maybe they were already dead.
That's what I was meaning. Yeah, that's what I was meaning, and that is the biggest tragedy. Like a way, somebody who's gotten to that point where they
live their life to die.
There's a study
I think
that
that's
I referenced.
where you got a lot of these people that are on medications and stuff like that, man. They get into that kind of mode.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
There's a study in The Body Keeps the Score about that, and they actually I know that Richard Grove uses the term learned helplessness, and this is a different, like, nuanced wording of like what that means. This study actually talks about how these dogs were kept in cages. They were shocked repeatedly until they realized they couldn't get out of the cage. Then they'd open the doors to the cages and they'd shock them again, and the dogs would just lay there because their brain didn't try to escape. That's learned helplessness. That's actually it's a neural pathway, and almost every single dog had to be physically dragged out of the cage multiple times, repeatedly, before the animals were able to realize that they could run away and escape. Because if you realize you can run and you can escape, the human will escape. The human will always survive if it realizes it has an opportunity to. So that ties into what I also wanted to say. It's really, really easy to fall into fear right now. This kind of hits close to home because I have a husband and we have weapons in our house that we like to use. We know how to use them appropriately. and
Yeah.
this whole like Duncan Limp thing about how he just was living his life and he ended up dead, shot next to his pregnant girlfriend. And
Yeah.
it's so easy just to like fall into that fear when you're being conditioned every single day to give
Yes.
up your rights,
Yes.
to give up your right to say something, to feel a certain way, and to discuss a conversation without fear of bad, really bad negative repercussions, even if they're just in our heads. That's all I had to say.
Yes.
Nice.
And I agree. And for me, it's not living in line with your values. If I don't know who I am, I'm susceptible to outside forces, which are continually telling me who I am
Who you
and
should
what I
be.
should aspire to and where I should be
Right.
doing with my life. Whereas if I'm living in line with my values, those manipulations have less of immediate effect. Like it still takes work. It's not perfect. It's not like I'm like right on it every time. Um, but I do try every day. And yeah.
Well, I'm glad you brought that thing up in regard to um, the that like rat in the cage kind of mentality that fear represents. That's the thing that we're trying to overcome and overcome for people, because they're in a lot of ways they feel like they're trapped the in the person that they are, and it's really just their mental projection or conditioned projection of who they are or who they think they are, because they've been taught to believe that learned helplessness has made them believe that they're something that they're not. They're just a sliver of who they are.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you
That
So
live?
is
was
that
perfectly
How do
said.
you live in
I
your
love
full
that.
potential then?
so
Well, you have
is
to overcome fear.
yeah.
Go
So
ahead.
is there a point within you? Is there something within you that you can rest in and that you can act from, which is not controlled or diminished by fear? And then, if, like we said earlier, if there's a discrepancy between love and between fear, so is there, can you act, can you talk, can you walk out of love? And how does that feel as compared to, how does it feel when you act, when you live in and out of fear? And then
Yeah.
the choice kind of becomes easy, because it's, you're expanding and you're opening, and you feel much better if you act from love and if you live in love, and as compared when you do from fear. So the choice is kind of easy. So it's then to identify, what are the things that make you, think, talk, walk, act, feel loving and out of love, as compared to what are the things. And that's something that you can do in every moment, because what is it, I don't know, if I'm sitting right here with you guys now, is that something that, that fulfills me and that makes me, feel wonderful? Is that something that, kind of puts me in a fearful, in a bad mode? And so if you judge everything, if you're aware, and in every moment, you make that judgment for yourself. Is that something that brings me forward? Is that something that puts me on the side of love, or is that something that puts me on the side of fear? Then I believe that is maybe like a very simple, down to earth technique or strategy that one could use to continuously stay with that which really brings us towards the fulfillment of our true potential.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'd like to say, once you start to learn the difference, you start to realize when you're, working from a point of love and when you're working from a point of fear. Be prepared to have a momentary bit of insane fear about how often you're working from fear. Because that was it for me, where it was like, holy crap, I'm working from fear for way way more often than I even wanted to admit to myself. And I think that I'm a pretty self-reflective person. Maybe everyone thinks that about. I'm sure everyone thinks that about themselves. That's normal. We live in a very fear-based society right now.
Yeah.
I'm watching everybody around me. I was tickled today because my bosses were actually sitting outside on the sidewalk promoting the local grocery store, like takeout, so that they don't go out of business. They're just sitting there
Mm-hmm.
with their drinks, hanging out on the sidewalk. I'm like, good for you. Like half my friends have canceled plans. Everyone's like self quarantined. Like nobody wants to be around each other. And I'm like, there's a lot of fear in society right now, and I just know that that's not
Yeah.
good for the immune system. So
Yeah.
Yeah. So whatever you have to do to relieve your heart from that. The tapping thing, the tapping, the point halfway between the heart and the throat. So there's like a heart protrusion here. When one is feeling fearful, just tapping that point can really, really help.
Yeah. Awesome.
But the actual tapping thing also helps, also helps. But this is a easy thing to do.
So I guess is everybody ready to talk about the exercise and what we have in mind?
Yes, right away. Bring it on.
So the exercise that I have in mind is contemplating your own death and the meaning of your life via writing your own eulogy. And this is straight out of a book um, Stephen Covey wrote, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I did this quite a few years ago, but I think it really did make a difference in my life. And
So I
so I
thought you
can I
said
can
we were going
definitely
to get to
attest to it.
plan our own funeral. I was
Well,
all
if
into
you want
that.
to do it
really
in that your
excited.
way, if you want to,
I was
if you
really
want to,
excited to plan the funeral.
Yeah, I
okay, all
definitely
right.
want to plan the
I
funeral.
don't want to. I just wanted to make sure that it was, you know, in a consumable fashion. So however you want to do it, but essentially, I thought eulogy would be better than the other way, but we can do it either way, or both, or any other way that gives people the opportunity to think about what their death is and what it might mean to other people.
So when are we going to talk about it? Is it like in 2 weeks? Do we have 2 weeks, or is it
Yeah, so
tomorrow?
2 weeks. You got 2 weeks to think about this.
Are we going to remember to do this if we have 2 weeks? It's a long time.
Well, you might want to
Well, we
just do
need
it
to
right
hold each
after
other
this.
accountable.
Yeah. Well, the idea is to come back and talk about what this might mean, because I've got some additional things that are going to come from that, but essentially some solutions as well as some skills that people can utilize to use this as an opportunity to confront their fear and be able to like diagnose it for themselves, through learning about confronting the fear of death.
Well, we have
What
to
did you
make
get out of
sure.
that?
Go ahead,
How did it
Dennis.
impact you? Because you said it was like a life-changing experience. Is there anything you can share with us, like what changed for you afterwards?
Yeah, I was in a situation in my life. I was a young man. I was widely celebrated for being a crazy young man that loves to drink and party and tell good stories and stuff, and be the life of the party. So I had a lot of friends and a lot of friends that I'd go drinking with and stuff like that. But it was like ruining my life, and I most people can't confront that, but luckily I had the opportunity to do that. And I guess it was kind of a life or death situation that like turned a light on in my head and said, you know what, maybe I need to find some more information about how to live better. And so then I picked up that book and I
Mm.
Which
read the
book?
book and I did the exercise, the
The
seven
Stephen
habits of highly
Covey.
effective people. Yeah. And I did the exercise, and probably within, you know, uh, one of the things then you do is put your goals together, like your 1 year goal, your 5 month goal, or 6 month goal, and your 1 year goal, and maybe your 5 year goal. So I had a 5 year goal, and within 8 months, I had my 5 year goal taken care of.
Nice.
So it was
Yay.
a
See,
magical
having
difference.
goals makes all the difference. When you don't have goals, you don't know what's going on. Just watch
Yeah, but it's
Netflix every
also
day.
um, kind of confronting some of the things that you're afraid of, because really the things that we are afraid of are our own enemy, the enemy that we have inside, especially if they're irrational. If they're dangerous, if they're really dangerous, it's probably a good thing. And then then most of those things that are protected, as Willow has pointed out to us many times, is there's a kind of a reason that your subconscious is protecting that thing, because it thinks it's some kind of learned helplessness or irrational belief or limiting belief, but it's doing it because of the trauma, and it's trying to protect. So that fear is like one of those things. It's like a junkyard dog that you just got to learn how to live with and befriend.
Mm. I like that. Like, you are not your trauma. Your trauma is not your identity. That is just something that has happened to you. That's just, it's happened. It's caused a learnt behavior mechanism that most likely may stay with you for your entire life. But that's still not who you are. That
Right.
Getting to that point is, I find, freeing.
Yeah, I have a kind of a vision of like confronting my fears as like me collecting a pack of you know mean junkyard dogs that basically I can like whisper to, and they do my bidding, and I just got a hold of a chain of like 10 or 12 of them, but they're all just super loyal to me because they're like my best friends. But those are the junkyard dogs that were the fears that I had, that I confronted it and befriended.
That's cool.
Hmm.
It
That's
is,
a nice
isn't
picture.
it?
Yeah.
I love that image because I have also had that image. The only difference is they're definitely not on chains because they're so loyal to me that I don't need chains.
Yeah, well, maybe that's the case. Maybe they're just, they're out in the
We're good
forest and they're
friends.
just like all around, they're just all hanging around. Yeah, I have a great image of that. My cousin's uncle or grandfather uh, was a guy that was a dog guy, and like stray dogs from all over the place would just come to him, and he'd just have like 20 dogs with him all the time, and then they did anything. He was like a dog whisperer, they like he'd tell the dog to climb the tree and the dog would climb the tree.
I have a
Insane.
picture. I have a picture that I use for inspiration. It's of a small girl, like probably 6 or 7 years old, and she's in a white dress and she has just bright green hair, and she's standing in a pack of greyhounds, and she's just like there with them, like she's the human of the pack. And I don't know, there's something about it where it's just like this girl has made friends with all of these wild animals.
you know
It's empowering.
Powerful. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is like the last thing I'll mention is that David Hawkins' scale of consciousness, which is really kind of a rating of emotions, different emotions that goes from I think shame being the lowest level of consciousness and like the lowest energy output in your body through like your rhythms or whatever, to like total enlightenment, on the other end of the scale. But the difference being, I think it's like between like pride and courage. That is like the difference between being negative, being force, or being afraid, to being empowered. And love, as an example, is far up on that scale. And so like embodying love more and getting rid of
And all
fear,
its friends.
yeah, can be very empowering. So I guess that's kind of the conclusion.
I think that's the death of this episode.
Yeah. I think I really appreciate you guys chiming in, because I think you all had something really valuable to say, and I greatly appreciate your point of views, as well as the time and attention of our audience. Really appreciate that, of course. And remember, our shows are on live Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Yes.
For now.
All right, so we're gonna play
For
the
now.
outro now, right? Yeah.
Have a wonderful day.
All
night,
right.
Whatever.
Have a wonderful whatever.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.